to measure yourself against anything else is not the point. The point is to have a measurement that you value and that you can be in tune with to say, is this what I want, regardless of whether anyone else wants it.
I'm thrilled to be speaking with Christina Wallace, storyteller and entrepreneur. A self-described human Venn diagram, Christina has crafted a career at the intersection of business, technology, and the arts. She is currently a senior lecturer of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School, an active angel investor, and a Tony-nominated co-producer of Broadway musicals. Her latest book is The Portfolio Life: How to Future-Proof Your Career, Avoid Burnout, and Build a Life Bigger Than Your Business Card. A serial entrepreneur, Christina has built businesses in e-commerce, edtech, and media. She co-authored the book New to Big: How Companies Can Create Like Entrepreneurs, Invest Like VCs, and Install a Permanent Operating System for Growth. She was the co-host of The Limit Does Not Exist, an iHeart podcast with millions of downloads over 3 seasons and 125 episodes. Christina sings with various chamber choirs, loves adventure travel, and identifies as a mediocre endurance athlete. She lives in Cambridge with her husband and their 2 children. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted you included the mediocre endurance athlete. Some people edit that out, and I'm like, no, it's important that I specify I'm not good at it, but I do it anyway. And that is a key part of who I am.
Absolutely. I identify with that so much. I used to call myself a triathlete, TRY dash athlete.
I love it.
And I identify with you so much. I feel like we are kindred spirits. For many years, I also spoke of my career at the intersection of arts, technology, and business. And I love how you talk about the human Venn diagram. And I loved your book, The Portfolio Life.
Thank you.
Your book has been out now for a little over a year.
Mm-hmm.
What have been some of the themes that you've heard from readers so far?
I mean, first and foremost, the amount of joy, I think, that I have felt coming back to me in my inbox and in person at signings of having a name for this thing that so many people have been doing their whole lives, right? I did not invent the portfolio life. I simply named it. And there's something so powerful about naming something that gives it legitimacy.
Yes.
I joke that I wrote this book to explain to my mother what the hell it is I've been doing with my life. But I think for many people, they feel that same friction of like, this is who I am. And yet so many other people don't understand it or recognize it or value it. And so having a name, having a container for it, I think has just blown me away by how many people have just really responded to that. I think the other thing that's been really interesting, right, there's sort of the very typical reaction, which I expected, and that's, I'm already so busy. How am I supposed to do more? And I feel that deeply. And there's been a lot of really fun conversations around priorities and saying no, which is often what that conversation is really about. It's that they don't feel they have permission to say no to things, and so have filled their lives with other people's priorities rather than their own. But the other, I honestly think the most interesting question that I've been asked, or maybe the most surprising question after doing a talk on the book, was from an MBA student at Harvard. This was like days before graduation. And she said, with no irony, I understand the portfolio metaphor. I'm in finance. But what is the index that I should be comparing my portfolio to measure the alpha so that I know I'm outperforming the market? And for anyone who's not in finance, alpha literally is the measure of how much better your investments did than the general market. So it tells you, are you outperforming the market? And And I paused for a second and I said, I think you've missed the whole point here. To measure yourself against anything else is not the point. The point is to have a measurement that you value and that you can be in tune with to say, is this what I want, regardless of whether anyone else wants it? She's like, okay, I'll think about that. And I was like, yeah, you do.
I love that story. There is no alpha. Spoiler alert. Yeah. Something that we explore on this show that I'm reminded of in this moment, we talk a lot about how being an ampersand, it doesn't mean that you're 50-50 or, 25, 25, 25, 25. It's not this totally balanced or splittable thing that you can do. And it also changes sometimes. Our current identities might look different from years ago or decades ago. We might choose to reveal or lean into one part over another for a period of time. Another ampersand shared this visual that she's had. She's a designer, so visuals come really easy, of this 4-burner stove, or maybe it's a 6-burner stove. And you have stuff going on the front burner, right? And then you have things like simmering in those back burners. You describe your current ampersand as storyteller and entrepreneur, and you are and have been many, many other quote-unquote titles. Of the many facets of you, what's inspiring you to lean into these two right now?
I chose the word storyteller for this season because it encompasses so much, right? It includes things from writing my books to giving keynote speeches, to being on podcasts, to, going to parties and having a good story over a cocktail, to now the work that I'm doing on Broadway. And what I love right now in this chapter, I have been reconnecting with theater after almost a 20-year hiatus. I love that visual of the stove. I often think about it like a sound mixing board. And it's almost like you have all the different levels, and you have kind of what are the categories beneath them. And for almost 2 decades, my theater mixing level was at basically 0. But it was still there. It was always there. And it would always be there. And then for this season of life, I had both the opportunity and the wherewithal to bring that back in a really meaningful way. And at the beginning, it was like a 5%. I was like, I'm going to invest in theater. It'll be my thing. Like I invest in startups. And then I had a few friends being like, how do we do that? And then I had a few productions saying, do you want to get more involved? And it was like one thing after another that went from 5% to like 50% in just a few months. And I was like, oh, like it's been there all along and I've been feeding it. Maybe it was at 1% for a while, but it was there and it was ready to get back into play. And so part of this season for me is that storytelling has been a piece of me for my entire life, but I'm expressing it in different versions right now. Theater and Broadway is becoming a big part of that. And that some of it is just opportunistic, right? What is available, what fits what I want, and what can I say yes to right now? And that's where we've landed. And entrepreneur, obviously, it shows up in my teaching of entrepreneurship and my writing about entrepreneurship, but I'm being very entrepreneurial in the work that we're doing on Broadway, how we're thinking about making it accessible for other small dollar investors, the way that tech investing has become over the last decade for angel investors, and how we think about new investor cultivation, as well as new play development. A lot of producers and other theater makers have sort of sat up straight and taken notice and said, wait, you're doing a lot of things really differently. Tell me more, like what's going on here? So I think both of those identities are mashing up and intersecting in really fun ways right now, where I could have had the exact same ampersand, storyteller and entrepreneur, a decade ago, but how they were expressed would have been very different.
Right. And to bring it together with your technology and entrepreneurship background and bringing some of that cultural mindset and thinking into the theater world is so exciting. You're co-producing Romeo and Juliet on Broadway this fall, starring Rachel Zegler and Kit Connor, which is super, super exciting. What does it feel like to return to theater in this capacity?
First and foremost, it just feels like a dream come true to get to come back, right? I thought when I stepped away, I was originally a director and sort of a half producer, half actor. I was a little bit of a lot of things, but I was primarily a director. And when I stepped away in 2008 to go to business school, my thought was that I would come back in more of an arts management role. So I always knew that kind of the business side of it was something that I understood and was really interesting and that I had a point of view on that I could offer. But because of the financial crisis and then the opportunities that came after that, I went on a very different path into tech startups. And so for a big part of me, I really thought that my relationship to theater for the rest of my life would just be one as a patron, one as someone who could go and support the arts. And I would still dabble here and there and, host a 50-state theater festival day of activism and like random things here, but I never...
Just little things.
Just little things, a little off-Broadway reading. But none of it felt real. And so getting to come back in this setting at this level, right? Broadway was always the goal. And to be welcomed back at this level just is surreal. But there's also something really delightful about being able to not just show up after this 2-decade hiatus, but to show up with all these new skills and networks and understanding of how business works and how the world works and where capital flows come from and go. And to show up saying it's not that I'm back where I was when I stopped 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I've gained 20 years of experience in these other sectors that make it possible for me to do this, which would not have been true if I had stayed and followed this linear path.
Yeah.
And so that just feels really, I don't know, like reinvigorating that my model is not just bullshit to justify a ton of interests, but actually it works,
It works. And I'm also getting the sense of like right time, right place, right person, right experience, that you're bringing all this together.
Yeah.
I want to go back in time a little bit to another kind of right time, right place moment for you. 2018 was a big year for you. You said yes to doing a TED Talk, and this is the big TED, not TEDx, on a topic that you say was only tangential to your work. I have watched the talk, and it was brilliant. It's been viewed over 2.5 million times. Share a little bit about how this opportunity came to you, how you said yes, and also what's come of it since.
It is, it's always one of my like random fun facts thing. You're bearing the lead here. The talk is about how I set up a sales funnel to meet my husband through online dating, right? Nothing that has anything to do with the rest of my portfolio. But I had been going to Big TED for a few years through my job at Bionic. I was working in business development and marketing, and part of my job was to meet CEOs and folks who were really thinking about how do we grow our company. And to do that, I had to go to Davos and Cannes and TED. Terrible job. And so I was going, and I had a lot of friends who had been attending for many, many years, but it's really expensive. It's like $10,000 or $12,000 to go. That's just the registration fee. And so it had always been out of reach until it was something I needed to do for my job. So I showed up, and I had some relationships already, and then I just poured myself in meeting everyone else and being friendly and just having the time of my life for 2 years. And then my third year came up to attend, and I got this email. TED is in April, and I got an email in February from a woman I had known before I started attending, and it turns out she was a curator, which is their name for the people who pick the talks that happen. And she said, listen, we're trying something new. TED is like a week long of those talks that you see online, but it's like all day for 5 straight days. So it can get heavy, right? It can be a lot. And so they were like, I think we want to try something new where we do almost like a palate cleanser halfway through the week. And to do that, we are looking for funny, unexpected, irreverent talks, 5 minutes long with auto-advancing slides. So you can't, this is not your chance to like, we're going to give you 5 and then you just take 15 as though it's your thinking it's going to be your big TED debut. It truly is meant to be like the palate cleanser, the sorbet between the meals. We're not even going to record it, right? Like, don't even think of this as a big deal. But because we're deciding to do this kind of last minute, we need people who can just pull this off. And we know you've got a theater background. We know you're great on stage. Like, do you have A, any interest? B, do you have any ideas of what you would talk about? And C, could you get us a script in like 8 days? And I was like, well, I guess I could talk about how I met my husband through this sales funnel. And they're like, yes, that's hilarious. Let's do it. So I wrote the script on a plane coming back from an off-site in Iceland and sent it in. I think I memorized the whole thing on the plane to TED, to Vancouver. And the whole time was kind of like, this isn't real. This is just fun. And that's cool. But like, why not say yes to fun? They see I'm good on stage. Maybe I'll get to do a real TED Talk. And I get there, and at some point between showing up and getting on stage, they said, well, we are going to record it, but it's not going to go online. Like, don't worry about it. We're recording everything. So it's just easier to record it. And I went first. So I was the first of 10 5-minute speakers, which is why when you watch the video for like the first minute, no one knows what they're supposed to be doing. Like, the audience is like, are we supposed to laugh? Is this real? Like, what's happening? And then at some point they realize like, oh, we're allowed to have fun. Like, this is okay. And so I did the whole thing. And, months later, they said, we said we weren't going to put it online, but Chris thinks it's fun. Chris Anderson, who owns TED, he thinks it's fun. Do you mind if we put it online? I said, that's fine. Like, it has nothing to do with my work, but I don't care. They put it online and it got almost 1 million views in the first week. And they're like, oh, it seemed to resonate. And so now every year over Valentine's Day, they promote it on the TED homepage. And it's made its way to TikTok. But it's been so funny because I said yes because why not? Why not say yes to the opportunity to speak at TED? And as a result, number one, it's been my best clip for booking keynotes for my actual work. People see that I have stage presence and that I'm funny and I can tell a great story, even if it has nothing to do with my topic. And it's been delightful. It's actually been really helpful there. But it's also led to a bunch of really random things. Like, I got to be a talking head for the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, the CBC's documentary on 20 years of online dating. They had me as like an expert.
Amazing.
And to speak about it, which was so fun to speak about it from the business model side of like why dating sites kind of suck intentionally, because it's in their best interest to keep you coming back. Right? Yeah. They make money the more that you're on their site. So I got to talk about the business model side of it, but then I also got to talk about my own personal experience with it. And that was kind of fun. I was a random radio guest on a show in Australia about love. And I was like, guys, this is not my focus, but I'm happy to weigh in.
Let's take a moment to reflect on this question. What have you said yes to that has led to new opportunities? Outside of hosting this podcast, I partner with leaders in the workplace to turn professional challenges into leadership successes and career progression. I love working with executive leaders, aspiring C-suite professionals, and of course, ampersands. If any of this sounds interesting to you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. That's JESSICAWAN.com. Now, back to the show. say in your book that you felt a lot of pressure from the adults in your life when you were young to choose math or music or choose one job, and you really didn't want to. And it turns out that this not choosing has really defined your career in a wonderful way. Now that we are the adults, what advice would you give to the younger generations?
So one of the things that I have watched from afar with a little bit of trepidation over the last couple of decades is how much more insane school, high school, middle school has gotten, right? This focus. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was pretty nuts when we were going through it. And it just seems like the college admissions race now starts in like preschool. Mm-hmm. And this pressure, I'm seeing it in some of the girls. You know, I do a lot of work with high school and middle school girls, sometimes around STEM, sometimes around just entrepreneurship. And you feel that pressure from 12 years old of like, well, you can see that even if they're not using these words themselves, it's basically like, what is my angle going to be for my college admissions essay? Mm-hmm. What's my angle? Am I the athlete? Am I the entrepreneur? Am I the philanthropist? Like, what's my angle? And they feel this need to specialize because the fear of being kind of well-rounded is that it's useless. Mm. And so what I try to counsel them on, and certainly what I'm coaching and thinking about parenting my own children on, is not to think about it as well-rounded, but instead of think about it as well-lopsided, right? You can have multiple things in your life. You don't have to focus down to one so that you have this really clear brand, I am the blank. But you do need to have some specifics, right? You need to have some pointy corners that say, this is how I fit into the class, into the world, into the whatever. And it just happens that I have multiple weird jutting angles, right? And so you can be a musician and a science geek and an athlete, and maybe you're a mediocre athlete, which is why I lean into my mediocre endurance athlete, because that tells me something about you too, that you don't only do the things that you're excellent at. You're willing to show up and be sort of average. And that is a mindset that took me a very long time to be okay with, and is something I actually look for when I'm hiring. Not that I want people who are okay with being mediocre, but there's, for high achieving people, if you can't tolerate being average, you can never be excellent because you'll never get through that messy middle. So it means you'll never learn anything new, right? And so I think as I look at young people, part of it is like, allow yourself to experiment and explore for far longer than you might see everyone else around you, right? They're going to start homing in and focusing, and you just keep experimenting, and yet double down on the stuff that clicks for you. Mm-hmm. And just be thoughtful about, right? You can't do 17 sports in the same season, of course. But how might you put together your portfolio of things that you love that kind of complement each other or balance in some way the year, but allow you to really gain that full expression of yourself. Yeah.
And life is too short to not do the things you love and spend time on the things that light you up. This is great advice.
And the flip side is your life doesn't end or start or whatever at the end of college. Like, it's not right. I've talked to a couple of recent grads who are kind of like, I'm just waiting for my life to start. Like, before I can pick a thing and get an apartment and like find the boyfriend or whatever. Like, I just got to get my life to start. And I was like, your life has started. Your life is ongoing. And that is freeing because it means you can always start something new. Yes. And you can always give something up. Mm-hmm. It's not like, okay, we've started the race and now you're stuck on whatever thing you chose and that's your path. Every day you can decide to make a different choice.
I love that. When you think about your work throughout a long period of time, what do you think are some of the themes that have tied together the various projects and endeavors that you've taken on?
I I mean, I think one of the things that I will frequently say is I don't think I've ever been hired for a job I'm actually qualified for, including the ones that I did myself, right? When I was a founder of various ventures, in almost every situation, I stepped into it saying, I know a little bit and I know a lot more about what I need to learn, and I'm going to figure it out. And I think that sense of boldness in the face of the unknown has probably tied together a lot of what I do, in that I'm just always a little bit opportunistic about where is the next great opportunity, right? Like I don't have some grand plan. I have certainly a long list of fabulous things that I hope to do before I die, sure. But I also recognize that so much of this world is about timing, is about luck. And so part of it is I'm just going to put my energy, my interests, my love out in the world. I'm going to invest in the people around me, my network, my friends, and help them succeed. Because you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I want to surround myself with amazing people. And then like all of that energy and investment and love, it all comes back, which sounds very like woo woo. And I'm not very woo woo in general, but I think there's something just very creative and open-minded and like it's all going to work out at some point. Mm. And I want to see what the next door leads me to. You know, I don't have some big strategy or some checkbox to complete to feel like I've impressed someone or even myself. Mm. And I like that. My husband and I just celebrated 8 years together. And we were like, what is this 7-year itch people are talking about? Like, we haven't had a chance to get bored. We've moved apartments, houses, jobs, cities, had a kid, had another kid. Like every single year, we've had 2 to 5 major changes. Yeah. So there's no boredom anywhere to be found. And I think that's probably the connective tissue between all of it. I can see why it looks like I'm a dilettante on the outside, but
you're not.
I still maintain there's strategy to everything.
Yeah, I think this following opportunity, and I like to say following the breadcrumbs of what are the little gifts you're even kind of leaving yourself, or when you look at the last year and what has happened and how you've grown, like what does that inform you about the future? And I love that you brought up the, you are the average of the 5 people around you. I was actually at dinner with an old friend. We were roommates in our 20s. And she said, you told me this. Do you still believe it? And I said, yes. And I'm so happy. And, one of those people right now is an 8-year-old. And that's cool. Spending a lot of time with my son these days.
A lot of time. No, but it's so interesting though, because I look at, my closest circle and sort of my next layer out maybe, and I see a whole bunch of people who are all portfolio lifers, right? But when we kind of unspool the thread a little, it's not like we all found each other and said, oh, we're all the same. Let's keep doing it. Yeah. It's like someone did something and that inspired someone else to make a big change. And that inspired someone else to think differently about their next opportunity. And all of a sudden, my best friend goes from being a middle school science teacher to being an OB-GYN in her 40s. Oh, and like literally 15 years as a middle school biology teacher, went to medical school at 36 and is now an OB-GYN. My other best friend is a fabulous organist and professor of organ who's now working on writing a book about stage fright and nerves. And my mother-in-law, who is this incredible executive and lawyer for her whole career, retires and now has become a docent at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, leaning into her first love, which was art history back in college. And you just look around and see kind of all these twisty-turny people seeing the what's the next chapter? Yeah. Time for a new chapter, right? Like, I think that more than even the portfolio framework for me has been the most freeing. This idea of seasons of life.
Yes.
which should be fairly obvious as a musical theater nerd who's been singing Rent since high school. But
seasons of
this
life,
notion,
yes,
like that you can be one thing and want one thing, and then that can end. And it doesn't mean you failed yourself or you gave up on a dream. It means that no longer serves you. So what is the next season?
Yeah, I love it. I feel like this idea of ampersand, I've heard multi-hyphenate, multi-passionate, portfolio life, reinventing yourself. They're all in the same wonderful neighborhood of embracing who we fully are and leaving the door open for opportunity, and also honoring like maybe something is complete, and that's cool too.
Yeah.
I think of your book as required reading for all ampersands, for the School of Ampersands. And as you know, the Ampersand Manifesto, the title of this podcast, is something that we're really co-creating through these interviews. What would you like to add to the manifesto?
I think one thing I love so much about the ampersand framework, that mindset, is that it's about identity rather than activity, right? And I talk about this quite a bit in the portfolio life as well, that your Venn diagram, as I use, my analogy, is about who you are, and the portfolio is about what you do. And that Venn diagram, it's pretty static-ish, right? Like you can still add things to it, but mostly if you look at it, it's like, who are all of the ingredients that make up who you are? And the portfolio is just how you choose to express who you are in this particular set of activities for this particular season. And so what I love about the ampersand, and you can decide how you want to frame this in your manifesto, is just this notion of like the and is about figuring out kind of the identity, the worlds that you live in. And that gives you so much flexibility in the expression of that identity in whatever kind of tactics and avenues and paths that come across. But you can change what you do from day in and day out and still be core to that ampersand identity. And to do that really effectively, I think the challenge then becomes pushing yourself to really frame who you are at a higher level understanding, right? When I'm saying storytelling and not Broadway producer, storytelling, not author, storytelling, not public speaker, because all of those are expressions of storytelling, but storytelling is the much bigger idea. So I think there's a little bit of a kick in the pants along with the inspiration that comes along with the opportunity there to define your ampersand.
Well, Christina, it has been such a delight talking with you. Folks, you can learn more about Christina at ChristinaWallace.com. We'll link to this in the show notes. If you liked this show, hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow ampersands. And if you're enjoying our show, please consider leaving a rating or a short review so that more people can find out about the show. I had a chance to listen back on my interview with Christina. There were so many nuggets of wisdom, and I wanted to share 3 key takeaways. 1, you are the average of the 5 people closest to you. I had to go back and look up where this quote actually came from. It's attributed to motivational speaker Jim Rohn. And of course, on the internet, there's a lot of debate about whether it's true or not. I don't think the truth of it is actually the point. The point is to pause and reflect on how you're spending your time, with whom, and how you feel about yourself as a result. None of us is an island. Our relationships are what make us who we are. 2, Christina shared that she doesn't think she's ever been hired for a job that she was qualified for. But she's approached new opportunities with boldness and a growth mindset. This philosophy for building a career flies in the face of a lot of conventional advice. It requires faith that good things will happen, the courage to go off the beaten path, and openness to change, always being on the lookout for new opportunities. 3. It was so inspiring to hear about Christina's return to the theater world as an investor on Broadway after not being super active in that world for many years. I really appreciated how she recognized that the theater part of her has always been there, even if it was dormant for a while. We all have our passions from when we were kids, teenagers, and young adults. And just because we get older doesn't mean we've outgrown them. In fact, we might be prepared to meet them again in a new way.
And it doesn't mean you failed yourself or you gave up on a dream. It means that no longer serves you. So what is the next season?